Good morning. This is Mona, and this is my morning view. Today, spring edition 2026, sun is shining. I don't see a cloud in the sky. It is blue. So, I'm being blinded by the sun right now because I'm sitting, and the only way to do this would be, maybe over here. Maybe. I slide my stuff over here. Because I need something to hold the camera up with my arm extended, or it's just not going to happen. Either that or find something to set it down here on the table. I guess that's doable. But they always say, oh, no, angle of the camera, it's everything. You know, I'm not that concerned. Not really. But I do try. I do try for your purposes. All right. So today, spring edition 2026, it is Thirsty Thinking Thursday. Thirsty Thinking Thursday. I have been doing these chicken scratch notes to say that I know what I'm going to talk about before I talk about it. And we have been doing a series, Fruit of the Spirit. Now, when I do the series on Thirsty Thinking Thursday, it usually goes beyond a month. And because it goes beyond a month, the beginning of it drops off after 30 days on Facebook. So make sure that you go over to YouTube, Mona E. Harrison, different than my Facebook profile, Mona E. Harrison. Go over there and hit subscribe. Subscribe, like, share, comment, both on Facebook and on YouTube, and get all the bells and whistles. Get notifications as well. All right, so with that, we are doing for today the fruit of the Spirit, joy. Joy. Okay, so I have a few. I have to put my eyeglasses on because I can't see you with my eyeglasses on. Same problem I had on Friday, okay? You are now blurry. All right, so I also have fingerprints on my glasses. That is not helping. All right. So when I'm talking about the joy of the Lord, right? Like when I looked up the definition for joy, they basically said the same thing. It said a deep-seated, lasting state. And I'll figure out what the rest of this chicken scratch is. It's not a fleeting emotion based on circumstances. However, when talking about biblical joy, gave me basically the same, except for its confidence in God's grace. Confidence in God's grace. So that was the difference between just the definition of joy and the biblical definition of joy. And so, when we look at God's grace, I wanted to clarify that joy in Greek is chara, C-H-A-R-A, chara. Grace in Greek is C-H-A-R-I-S, charis. So they come from really a very close related word, maybe even a root word combined. So when we look at the biblical definition of God's grace and we look at Greek wording, it's like, okay, the Greeks understood this. Perhaps. All right. So, when we're talking about the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians, Paul is talking about walking by the Spirit and avoiding gratifying the desires of the flesh. So he gives this whole list of those desires of the flesh. And I alluded to some of those last week because we're not really talking about, those things. However, they are the opposite of the fruit of the Spirit. And when we uh, succumb to those desires of the flesh. For example, I was using rage as an example. You know, we get really upset with somebody. Road rage. Okay, I live in New Jersey. I live in New Jersey. All right, so so what happens is road rage is a thing. It is absolutely a thing, and people get cut off all the time, and we don't know. It could be from arrogance, because there's a lot of arrogant drivers. It could be an accident, but no matter what, whether it's an accident or arrogance, we get irritated, right? And then we start being angry, and we start spewing out stuff. And that is not the fruit of the Spirit. That is the fruit of the flesh. That is the flesh being succumbed by your desires to be angry at that individual. And so there was a whole list of them. And so anytime you experience falling into that, you have to remember that in order to fall into that, you are laying down something else. Because guess what doesn't grow on the same tree? You have a tree that produces good fruit. There goes my hat. A tree that produces good fruit and trees that don't produce good fruit. And there's a lot of cultivating that needs to be taken place around a tree that produces bad fruit. There are times when you can't save the tree. But I'm pretty sure there's a biblical reference to someone saying, hey, let me take care of this tree for a little while. Let me nurse it back to health. Let me do the things that needs to be done. Let me break around that hard ground around the tree that, and put fertilizer, do all the stuff that needs to be done in order for this tree. And if the tree still doesn't produce fruit, if the tree is still not producing the fruit that you desire, then we can hone it down, cut it off. So there is a biblical reference to that. I don't know what it is right this moment, because I didn't think about it when I was writing this down. Because impromptu, man. I know this isn't impromptu, but part of this, every week I do give a little bit of impromptu. And it's bothering me that my hat is on the ground, and I'm trying not to reach for it and put it on the table. Those things I talked about on Monday. So, which was quite fitting, by the way, considering last week I was talking about the fruit of the Spirit, and when I was talking about it, I alluded to in Galatians what it was all about. People wanted to do things in the flesh to bring about God's law, to obey all the law of the Jewish custom. And for the Gentiles, Paul was like, no, absolutely not, because it's not by the law that you are saved, but by grace, charis, which is close to the word joy. So, when I was writing this down, it said, walking by the Spirit, avoid giftings and desires of the flesh. It also said, keep in step with the Spirit. And so I'm sitting there thinking, I'm a military person, so I have this sometimes things go into my brain about the military, and part of that was walking in step. When I was in the Marine Corps, if you walked with someone else, you walked in step. It didn't matter whether you were in uniform or not in uniform. It became a common practice to walk in step, because you did it while you were in uniform, and you did it while you were not in uniform. So So here you were walking in step with the other person. And the thing about like formations, when you see people, they always talked about practicing on the parade field, for people observing as they walk as one unit. So walking in step, walking by the Spirit, walking together in unison, you become one unit. And so that was part of my thought of, walking in the Spirit is what Paul was trying to get at, and saying this is the fruit of that. This is the stuff that when you're walking with the Spirit, these are the things that come out in your life. And when you're walking by the flesh, then those other things are what comes out. It looks like I got a mustache with my shadow. I got like a handlebar mustache. All right, so squirrel moment. All right, so bad company corrupts. You put good apples with a bad apple, it doesn't take long for that good apple to become a bad apple. And so we have to be mindful of who we hang out with. And so if you're hanging out with a bunch of people that walk by the flesh, chances are you're going to start walking and talking like them, because you walk in sync, you walk in unison. All right, so walk with the Spirit. Holy Spirit, not just any Spirit, Holy Spirit. Okay. In joy, there's rejoicing. Rejoice. And again, I say rejoice. Is repeating that, right? There's joy, but then there's secondary joy, third joy, fourth joy. It's like first breakfast, second breakfast, third breakfast, So anyways, you keep repeating the joy. Repeat the sounding joy. Repeat the sounding joy. Rejoicing. All right. So there's God's joy in us. For Jesus had the joy set before him that he was able to endure the cross. What was that joy? Knowing what was going to happen with us after it was finished. All right. There's joy in life. There's joy in relationships. There's lasting joy. And so all of these are biblical in each space. So it is profound, deep, engaging. It comes from knowing God. Oh, and serving. Not just knowing God, but serving God. And yesterday I was talking about knowing. There's a head knowledge of knowing. There's a heart knowledge of knowing. There's a you know something, and then there's a you know something. So there's that. Now there's two types of where you get joy from. One, the joy of the Lord is our strength, right? Joy of the Lord is our strength. And so when we're walking in joy, we have strength. One, joy is produced. I will read my chicken scratch. Joy is produced by something to do with pressing into the Holy Spirit. Indwelling. And the indwelling and pressing of the Holy Spirit. So joy is produced by the indwelling and pressing of the Holy Spirit. So when you are indwelling with the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit is indwelling in you, there's that. I was talking about pressing, I believe, last week in the pressing, right? So when you're getting into the deep of it, Joy is a virtue that is pursued and cultivated. Remember, I was talking about that tree, and you had to cultivate that tree in order for it to produce good fruit. Otherwise, left on its own, it was, the master was going to just cut it down because he's like, it isn't producing. Let's just get rid of it. And it's like, no, wait. Let me do this for this much amount of time. Let's see what happens if I can do something with this. So there was cultivating involved. So the fruit of the Spirit is cultivated. Joy in itself is cultivated because joy isn't determined by your circumstances. Jesus was on the cross. He was enduring great pain. The Father was turning away from him. But the joy that was set before him, he knew that if he could endure this and get through this, that there was going to be joy on the other side. And the joy was what our standing with God was going to be after it was done. It was reuniting us with our Creator. It's not about, it's about who Jesus is and who we are not, right? It's not about who we are. And it's not about what's happening around us. It's not circumstantial. See, happiness comes from the root word hap. And hap happens to be happenstance. And so happenstance is circumstances. But joy is not that. Like I said before, it's a deep-seated state of confidence in God's grace. It's not fleeting. It's not just an emotion. It's something that you do intentionally, deliberately. I have a few scriptures I can share with you. I just almost, you got to see the blue sky. A few scriptures. John 15:5 talks about the vine and the branches. Jesus is the vine and we are the branches. And as long as we remain in the vine, that we would produce fruit. That's that walking by the Spirit. That's that keeping in step with the Spirit, okay, with the Holy Spirit. Ephesians 5:9, the fruit of light is goodness, righteousness, and truth. So Ephesians 5:9 talks about some of those fruit of the Spirit there. That it's the fruit of light, not the fruit of darkness. The fruit of darkness is those things of the flesh. There's Colossians 3:12 through 14, where we clothe ourselves. Can't read my writing. Chicken scratch. It's basically clothing ourselves in those things, right? Romans, you can read it. Colossians 3:12 through 14. Romans 6:22. The fruit leading to sanctification. So this fruit of the Spirit, it leads to sanctification. So as we are deliberately choosing to walk in the fruit of the Spirit, when we're deliberately choosing to walk in joy, it brings us into that sanctification process. And when you succumb to the flesh, it's like it's almost like starting over again. You have athletes that train, and then they get injured, and they have to sit out on the sidelines. And as they sit out on the sidelines, they're getting all the stuff done to get them worked up to be able to step back in. But sometimes it's like, sometimes they feel like it's starting over because it's just like, this is grueling. And so when we fall into that area of the flesh, it's like an injury for an athlete. And so that athlete puts up with a lot of pain and endurance to do the right thing to get where they get. And then when they win the medal, when they win the gold, it's like that's the joy that was set before them. They were looking at the prize. They were looking at the win. And that's why Paul talks about running the race and talking about the prize and talking about those things. I mean, he was there for, in Greece where the Olympics came from. And so he would see athletes and so in that seeing of athletes and what they do to prepare and what they do for the prize, he equated that to this. Yes, the Olympics are not a biblical, godly, I gotta watch how I say that because I am totally into the Olympics and I love the Olympic Games and all of that. But its original purpose was not surrounded around God of the Bible. All right. So, anyways, And then Isaiah 32:15-17, the Spirit, that's an Old Testament verse, by the way. The Spirit poured out brings righteousness, peace, and quietness. And so I talked about the fruit of the Spirit in its whole, it's an entirety, and I spoke about just the attribute of joy, because like I said last week, the fruit of the Spirit is not multiple fruits. It is one fruit with like multiple flavors. So when I talk about the fruit of the Spirit in its entirety, I am talking about joy. And when I talk about joy, I'm talking about the fruit of the Spirit in its entirety, but with the attribute of just joy, which is that deep-seated confidence in God's grace, chara and charis, that it's deliberate, that it's something that is indwelling with the Holy Spirit being inside and pressing. And then there's that virtue that is pursued and cultivated. So there's an intentional and there's an unintentional. And when you are abiding in God's grace, when you're walking with the Spirit, that unintentional comes up from within. It has nothing to do with your surrounding circumstances. It is all from in here that is bubbling up and coming up. All right? So that is joy with the fruit of the Spirit. And I will leave you with that. Make sure you come over to YouTube, Mona E. Harrison. This one will be uploaded tonight or tomorrow. And blessings. Have a great day. And I will see you tomorrow for, guess what it is tomorrow? Feisty Friday. All right. I'll see if I can bring the feisty. I'm thinking about getting some merch, having some t-shirts, Memory Monday, Tips Tuesday, Wonderful Wednesday, Thirsty Thinking Thursday, and Feisty Friday. So I'm thinking about it. Let me know what you think. All right. Blessings, everybody. Have a great day. I will see you tomorrow. Bye. It always brings up the slow connection banner over, so I can't finish until it's gone. All right.